Okay, so if you're following along, you will have already watched the videos prior to this where we analysed the context that we had available. So I went through analysing the free context for a legacy project a couple of years back, and one of the ones that we talked about was a safe and comfortable home. When you're analysing yours, you might analyse all three contexts, you might do one. It depends on your approach and how you're kind of the detail you want to include in this point. So what we're going to be talking about today is getting first contact with the consumer, because one of the key pieces of primary research available to you is your consumer or your client, and we can get information from them in the form of interviews or questionnaires or so on and so forth. So what this video is about is the initial interview that you might have with your consumer, and it's probably likely you might do this several times as part of the iterative approach, and also as part of this kind of user-centered design approach where we're constantly getting feedback from our user, because every piece of feedback that we get can be counted as research and can improve our overall kind of practice and make sure that we are kind of reflective practitioners as we go. So this is the one I'm going to focus on in the interview. So I've kind of made a bit of a decision, I suppose, that I'm talking about safe and comfortable homes. And I'm going to talk about the process next of how you'd structure your interview, and then you can see how this kind of panned out in a sort of a mock interview as well in the next video. So the first thing I'd do if I was going to do an interview with someone is set the scene. So it might be an idea to jot some things down so you just feel comfortable when you're going to talk to your consumer or your client for the first time and you seem professional. So what I might do first of all, before I even start, is to think about the consumer or the client who's going to provide useful feedback in relation to the context that I've chosen. So if we go back here, you can see I've got 3 different areas there that I've looked at in the initial analysis. You might have done 20, 30, I mean as many as you want, but we've got 3 different areas. We've got kitchens, a garden, and we've got bedrooms there. Okay, now I'm going to focus on one, so I'm going to choose kitchen. And the person I interview, it could be a cook, it could be someone who just uses a kitchen frequently or has an understanding of that. And again, you can interview more than one person if you really want to kind of impress and gild the lily. So I'm going to choose that area, a kitchen, and I'm going to base my interview as if I'm speaking to someone who uses the kitchen frequently. Okay, so the first thing I might do is explain what I'm doing. So I might say I'm a student studying design technology. We've given the task to look at contexts. We could talk about what the product involves or the project involves, something like that. I could then go on to discuss the context that I've chosen. So the context that, as I said, I've chosen here is kitchens, and within that, safe and comfortable homes being the big overarching context. But we're talking about the problem of kitchens there, safe and comfortable use of the kitchen. I could use some of those sentence answers. So from the free context, you could explore those and the area they're focusing on. But there we go, it's just an idea for that. And then discuss your initial analysis from the 1, 2, 3 approach to begin the interview. So you could start by saying, these are all the contexts I was given. You then say, I identified some problems. So we talked about kitchen and garden and bedroom and stuff and the various different things. And then we could also talk about perhaps from the 1, 2, 3 approach, some of the solutions that were available at this time. So in the context of kitchens, we talked about the fact there's knife blocks and fire blankets and things like this. So products there to sort of solve some of the problems that we identified. And again, you can go into lots of detail about this or just summarise. So once you've set the scene for the consumer, what it's then about is asking a series of probing questions to try and get the response. Now, my recommendation at this stage is to just ask some questions, but literally just record exactly what the consumer's saying. And these questions here are designed to kind of get you started, just to get the conversation rolling. Now, they can work if you just kind of ask them and just write the response down. But you might find that these questions then branch off into other areas. It depends how skilled you are as an interviewer in terms of trying to get the most feedback that you can from the consumer. So what I'd go through, I might say, do you face any of the problems that I've identified? In my context there, we talked about knife safety and fire safety. Are there other problems that they face in their area within the kitchen? So they could talk about other things that they've faced. You could ask what concerns them the most or least. Now, what this will do is it will help guide your project so that if you're focusing on that particular consumer, you're not going to go off in a direction that's not going to interest them. You're going to stay focused on what they want and what they need, for example. And then you could move on to push a little bit more as to what they need and what they want. Now, this idea of needs and wants are almost like essential and desirable criteria that they would want for their project. So when you get these, if you get this feedback, this information can go straight into a design specification to help guide your project further, so that any design ideas that you come up with and then later talk to your consumer about to get feedback on, they're hopefully going to be guided a little bit by the needs and wants. And you might find again in the next interview they then throw up more needs or more wants, or they change their mind slightly, but it's just the first point of contact, and it's going to get us get the project rolling and get this like really iterative and sort of research-based, user-centered design approach going. We could then talk about if it's a problem that you've identified and you've identified some products, you could say, what do you think about the products that I've talked about? So we talked about knife safety. You could say, right, have you seen the knife block? Have you used the knife block, or any problems with a knife block? So effectively you're getting there a little bit of feedback that could go into sort of a product analysis type approach there. So you could find images of different products even and show them to the consumer and say, what do you think about these products? That's another lovely thing that you can do in an interview. But obviously if they've identified problems, then it'd be nice to know what solutions that they've got in their house. So you could say, right, you've identified the idea of knife safety, or you might have picked up something completely different. What are some of the things that you've bought or that you use in that particular context to help solve the problem? And what you could do is go through these questions over and over again to get more and more information to build up your analysis. So we've just talked about, as I say, knife safety, but if they've spoken about 5 different problems, you could then talk about each one and the products that they've used for each one and so on and so forth. And what you'll be left with if you record all this information is a very, very detailed transcript of the interview, which will help hopefully guide your specification, but it also might raise other pieces of research that you might want to do, such as the product analysis, as we've talked about. So this is the approach that you could follow, okay, as a first port of call, as part of a user-centered design approach. And then after this, you could then analyze the responses and go on and repeat the process as many times as you want. If you've watched this video and you want to kind of see how it looks in reality effectively, the next video in the sequence, what I'll be doing is actually undertaking the interview using these questions, and then I'll show you kind of the responses that I recorded and how they might be used in the context of your NEA.